This program may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Discretion is advised. When you look into the face of darkness, it stares back at you. The question is, who's watching who? Welcome to the dark side. This is the Watchers Paranormal Podcast.
To give you an idea of where the location of this story happened, if you're familiar with the Azores Islands, Azores, they're a small chain of 9 islands in the upper North Atlantic, somewhere in between North America and Europe, discovered by Portuguese sailors back in the 14th century. Islands have been uninhabited since that time. But then slowly after the 14th century, people started to immigrate, purchase land, farm, and grow the island. This story happens in the late 50s, 1950s. So Soldier has a weekend pass, and at the time there weren't a lot of automobiles on the island. A few buses, but at that time of the evening, nothing available. So he decided to take the long walk home, and to go from the base to his parents' house would have probably been maybe a 20 to 25 minute bus ride. It probably would lasted, because of the terrain and the different turns, it probably would have lasted him about maybe a good 2-hour walk, at least. So the story starts when he walks down the street. He's going to take a shortcut. So he takes an old dirt road. And as he's walking through there, he feels a little uneasy. He hears some noises, and of course it's just the wind. There aren't any wild animals on these islands. I mean, there's dogs, cats, cattle, horses, sheep, but nothing wild. So he's not too afraid. What he's afraid of more are the legends and the tales of the beast. Many of you have heard stories of wolfmen and werewolves. There have been many sightings of an apparent man-dog or werewolf over the centuries. This was one of the few times that someone had actually come in contact with one of these in close proximity. In the past, all the stories were told from a distance. So he continued walking. Again, the sound of the wind. If you looked over to the side, you could hear the waves crashing up against the rocks on the beach. So he still had a long way to go. After about half an hour, he decided that it was kind of spooky. Even though he was a soldier and he was brave, he felt spooked out a bit, and he decided to go off the dirt road and come back onto the main road, where he can walk through the main streets, and there were houses on the sides, and a little more secure, a little more safe, so he thought. There was also a lot of witchcraft on that island. A lot of witches, a lot of stories of spells, a lot of sorcery. A lot of things too were misconstrued. So with all these things conjuring up in the back of his mind as he's walking down this road, and if I could describe it to you, we're talking late 50s here, so a few lampposts here and there, but mostly dark. A little bit of light coming off of the homes if someone had a light on in the window. All the homes were made of concrete and with a clay tile roofing. So he's walking down. He's feeling okay, lights up a cigarette. Starts to pick up his pace a little bit. And as he turns into a small town, he's walking through, and from a distance, he notices something large kind of thrown itself up against the side of a concrete wall, like a barrier wall. And at first he thought, well, looks like a giant dog. And he had no fear of dogs, for he had a dog at home. But as he got a little closer, he noticed this thing was rather large. So he got within maybe 50 yards of this. And he started to slow down. He threw a cigarette out. Didn't want to bring any attention to himself. And he looks over, and this thing, and this is how he describes it. It looked like a giant dog, but with a hump on its back. And the hair on its back was pointed up, almost like a quill-like. Like the hair was like up on end, like a mane. But he said the head was really large and slightly disfigured. And the only type of dog breeds on the islands were domesticated dogs. I mean, you had your beagles and golden retrievers and border collies. The odd dog similar to a pit bull. There is a breed of dog on the island similar to the Canaria dog, which was after what the Canary Islands were named after. Not the yellow bird, but the actual breed of dog. And these are like pit bulls, but on steroids. They're very large. So he figured he probably encountered one of these dogs and it belonged to somebody nearby. So he walked over towards the sidewalk and like really close to the houses. And all the houses are all row houses, so they're all connected together. And he walked very slowly. And as he's walking, he notices that there's no leash on this dog. And it's behaving very erratic. It's throwing itself up against that steel, that concrete barrier, the wall. And it's making these weird grunty noises. And as it's rubbing itself up against this wall, there's a residue or film that's coming off of its body. And he said he could see that film, like a wetness or some sort, kind of stick on the wall there. He says this creature was in pain. Now, he didn't want to bring attention to himself, so he figured, how am I going to get past this? He says, I'm getting pretty close to this thing, and if I can't get around it, it's going to notice me, and then I'm in big trouble. He says, I don't have a backyard to run into. All these homes are row homes, and the only thing I have are doors and windows in front. And he says, it's unlikely someone's going to open a door at this time of night. This is probably now past midnight. If I start knocking on people's doors, they're going to get scared. They're not opening the door for me. And by the time that happens, this thing will come running for me, and God knows what's going to happen. So I start to slowly walk down, very close to the sides of the homes, very quietly, making sure none of the keys in my pocket or the lighter or anything rattle or make any noise to get this thing's attention. So I'm watching this thing, and it's moving around. It almost gets up over this barrier, and this barrier is probably almost 7 feet high. And it starts to climb up. At this point, I'm really freaking out. So I just hold my breath and I just stay there, frozen, hoping this thing doesn't see me. And now we're literally about 30 feet apart. It then comes down from the wall and it stands up on its hind legs. That's when I saw the beast come face to face and lock its eyes on me. I froze. It looked at me. It looked like as if it was in pain. but very angry also. He went back down on all fours, turned its gaze away from me, and started to slowly walk away from the wall, closer to the houses. Now, I grew up around dogs, he said, and they'll usually slowly make their way and circle around you to come up behind you sometimes. So I started to slowly walk, but I kept turning back slightly to watch the direction in which this thing was moving. And he kept moving forward very slowly. I caught him staring back at me once. I froze. I stopped. Then after a bit, I gained my composure. I turned and I slowly started walking. I wanted to get out of there as quick as possible, but I knew that if I started to run, this thing would catch up with me really, really quick. So I just walked very slow, but constantly turning my head to my left just to see where this thing was. And at one point, he was out of my sight. I couldn't see him. That's when I got really freaked out. I thought, oh my God, is he behind me? Is he in front of me? Where is he? So I stopped. I lit up another cigarette. I was so nervous. My mind was telling me, don't. It might pick up the scent of the smoke. But inside, I also needed that to calm me down. So anyway, I just continued smoking. And I walked very slowly. I turned back when I saw him again. This time he was facing towards me. And he was slowly walking towards me, very slowly on all fours. He was making these weird, high-pitched squeals, like he was in pain or something. But then he kept throwing himself up against the houses and rubbing his back really hard up against the concrete, like as if he was trying to scrape something off of himself. And I couldn't see anything visibly on him, like it didn't look like he was hurt or he had any sores or anything. It's just, it looked like he wanted to tear off his body. I suddenly realized that this couldn't have been a dog or some other creature. I remember the stories of my grandmother telling me, he says, of men being turned into wild dogs. For many centuries there on the island, like I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of sorcery and witchcraft. There had been a lot of stories about men especially being turned into these wild dogs. Those stories started to creep up in the back of my mind all of a sudden, and I thought, how am I going to escape this? So I slowly kept walking away, and just up ahead, about 10 feet ahead of me, I saw the corner of the street. I thought I could duck in there. That's going to go towards the beach. Maybe I can go over there and hide out and walk along the beach. But then I turned back and he kept coming slowly and slowly. By now, I was at that corner. I looked back one more time very calmly. I turned to my right, and then I just gunned it as fast as I could, as fast as I've never run before. I went right down the road, hopped over a small fence, and made my way onto the sand. I could see the ocean and the rocks within grasp. I kept running. I turned back one time, and there he was, standing at the top of the fence that I just jumped over. And he howled and howled. I thought I was a dead duck. I had my back to the ocean as I slowly was walking back, making sure I didn't trip over the rocks. And he just stood there staring at me. I yelled out, please leave me alone, spare me. I haven't done anything wrong. You go about your business and I'll go about mine. And he just stood there and stared at me. Then he howled one more time. and then threw himself over the fence away from me and disappeared into the darkness. I tried to catch my breath. I looked at my watch. It was now about 12:30. I still had at least another hour and a bit to go before I got home. So I decided to walk along the beach. I walked along the beach for a good 45 minutes, but I constantly kept looking behind me just to see if he was still following. And eventually I did make it home. As soon as I saw my street, I ran like hell. I fumbled with the key on the door. My hands were shaking. I managed to get the key in. I turned the knob open. I run inside. I lock the door, and I start yelling for my mom. My mom, of course, gets startled. My dad, they come out of the bedroom and what's going on. And I told them about the encounter I had. My dad said to me, "You're very lucky that he didn't latch on to you." He says, "I've heard many stories of these man dogs or werewolves or whatever you want to call them." He says, "I had heard tales of them when I was a kid. There had been people," that he said, "that had seen these things from a distance, but never close up." So we went up to the window and looked out to see if this thing was nearby. I mean, it had been almost an hour, but this thing could move. It was agile and very quick. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake pretty much the whole night.